Welcome to our series of one-on-one conversations with Irish women architects around the globe. This is part of the RIAI Women in Architecture celebration for 2020. And today I'm speaking to Sheila Carney, who is based in London. Sheila joined Scott Tallon Walker Architects, STW, in 1987 upon graduation from Bolton Street. She's now director of Scott Tallon Walker and manages and runs the London Office. She has extensive experience in healthcare sciences sector, including specialist cancer treatment facilities in hospitals across the UK, and I think also in Ireland, if I'm not mistaken, but we'll find out more about that now. So welcome, Sheila.
Hi, Carole. Nice to see you.
You too. So just maybe to start off, Sheila, you might just tell us a little bit about those early days, about going from graduation straight into Scott Tallon Walker and how that came about.
It was a very long time ago. So as you say, I left Bolton Street in 1987 and I was lucky enough to get a job in Scott Tallon Walker straight upon graduation. I think I was one of only two in our total class who managed to stay in Ireland that year. It was the depths of a recession, if you remember, in the late 80s. And most of my class went to London, some went further afield, but most went to London. So I was lucky enough to get a job and I started there pretty much straight after, about 2 weeks after we graduated. And I've been there ever since. So starting off, my mentor was our now chairman, Owen O'Moran, and he took me under his wing and I started working with him initially on Ballygall Church in Finglas, which was my first project. And I remember doing brick details. It was a brick building and it was very important to get the module of the brick correct and the 10mm gaps. So there was a doctrine started from day one in Scott Tallon Walker.
Yeah, and of course, everything was hand drawn then.
Everything was hand drawn. It was the days of old-fashioned die line printers and tracing paper and rotary pens, all a distant memory. But it was very nice, actually. It was kind of therapeutic in those days, the way you could sit at a board and draw. Now we're so dependent on computers, but everything was done by hand. So I worked my way through projects like that. I got into doing some commercial work, did quite a bit of work at UCD. And then I worked on the O'Reilly Hall, the original O'Reilly Hall, overlooking the lake at UCD for a few years. And I worked on some big commercial projects then, the Docklands, the IFSC and the North Block, Citibank headquarters and places like that, and amongst lots of other projects. And then I moved to London in 1999.
As if I remember correctly, you were one of the first architects that I remember of our kind of cohort, if you like, of our bunch, to really embrace technology.
Yes.
You very quickly became digitally literate, or certainly a lot more digitally literate than the rest of us. So
it was when I joined Scott Tallon Walker, it was just the beginnings of CAD, and they were one of the first practices to get computer-aided design systems into the office. And there was myself and another colleague, Brian, who became the CAD people, if you like, starting off. We were very interested in it and we went on courses and we learned how to use it. And it was a game changer, really. I remember we did the competition for the civic offices on Wood Quay, doing that on computer, and people were fascinated that we could replicate blocks and grid lines and things practically. But it was all black and white. There was no such thing as a Windows interface. It was old DOS-based screens and DOS commands and black and white monitors. But it was the bee's knees at the time. We thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And we progressed up through that.
Yeah. And if you moved on now, would you be using Revit and BIM in your?
Yeah, we do. Well, yeah, we do sort of as a standard now. Everything is done in Revit. It's sort of progressed on from AutoCAD, and we're working in the BIM environment on practically all of our projects. Personally, I don't do a huge amount in terms of drawing now, but the Revit skills are probably waning a bit. But I'm still obviously very much computer based. I use AutoCAD the odd time for myself, but generally speaking, I don't do a huge amount of production of drawings, more of an overview. But as a company, yeah, we're fully Revited up. And
so your role is very much more in kind of management and direction and strategy within the company. So when you moved to London, then did you move to London to take up a management role, or is that something that evolved?
No, it evolved. So when I moved over to London in '99, I became an associate a couple of years after that, and I was made a director in 2012, I think. About 8 years ago.
But I was woman director of Scott Tallon Walker, if I'm correct.
Yes, well, Joan Tallon was a director, but she left the company quite a few years back. I can't remember how many years ago it was. So yes, first in a long time, and still the only one at the moment. Hopefully there'll be more of us coming up in the ranks.
Yeah. So what does it entail managing the practice now? How much of your day is in management and how much of it is in architecture?
Yeah, God, quite a lot actually. There's another director with me in London, Kevin Bates. So the two of us are sort of looking after the office. But I suppose we're still, as a company, we tend to have director level service on all our projects. So we're still very much involved in projects. So we're involved in projects probably 60-70% of our time, and the rest of the time is management, admin, business development, all the other stuff that goes with that. Obviously managing staff, managing teams, putting bids together, but still very much involved in projects. So it's busy, it's a full-on job.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the University College Hospital in London, the proton beam therapy something more recent to be like? I remember hearing you and Owen speak about it, and it's fascinating work.
Yeah, so it's a major project. I've been working on it since we were appointed in late 2009 to do the initial feasibility studies. So this is for it's University College London Hospital, and it's their newest cancer treatment centre, effectively. So it's a proton therapy centre combined with one of the world's largest heme-oncology hospitals overhead, and it's located in the centre of London. So proton therapy is a very new, well, not a very new, but it's becoming more popular now, but it's a novel form of radiotherapy treatment for cancer, where they use protons rather than traditional photons, which are X-rays. Protons are much more specific in how they target cancer tumours. The challenge with building one is that the equipment is absolutely enormous and very, very heavy and very, very expensive. So we have a substantial basement. It's one of the biggest basements ever built in London. And the proton equipment is at the lowest level of this basement. And then we have a 7-story hospital above ground. So it was a major engineering and construction and design feat to get to where it is. We're nearly there. It's was due to open in July. It's going to be a couple of months late because of the impact of COVID on building sites over the last few months. But it's on target to open this year and treat the first patient hopefully by the end of the year when it's clinically commissioned.
Was there as much controversy over building such a vital service in the centre of London City? I'm just thinking of the Children's Hospital here in Dublin and all the controversy about selection of a city site. Did anything happen?
So we were involved at the very early stages. The Department of Health and the Treasury decided they were going to allocate funding to develop proton therapy in the UK as a crucial service for the health system. And trusts from all over the country were invited to put in bids, and we were involved in the submission of the bid for UCLH and for the Christie of Manchester. And both of those were selected as the 2 preferred centres. So both schemes went forward. And part of that bid, the strategic outline business case for that was that to develop a service like this, they have to be centrally located in the centre because they're so expensive and so difficult to build. You have to have them where they're close to major transport links and where there's population. So basically the London one caters for the bottom half of the country and the Manchester one will cater for the northern half of the country. But they're all close to transport hubs. They're also co-located with other services. So they're both on sites of existing hospitals where you have the adjacencies with the clinical pathways for other cancer treatments. So there was a logic to putting them in the centre. They really have to go in the centre of town. Our one is particularly difficult because we're smack on the middle of the Tottenham Court Road, and we've got tube stations beside us and the tube line running down the road, and we've listed buildings and we've residence buildings, and so there was a lot of challenges, but a very exciting project nonetheless to work on. Fascinating. I probably won't get to do another one in my career. I'd love to, but it's unlikely.
So obviously huge multidisciplinary team involved in getting a project like that up and running and delivering it. The role of the architect, I mean, how crucial is that? I mean, we hear all these stories about the UK, how the role of the architect is being weakened all the time by project managers and engineers. And is that true, or are we being a little bit? I
still think, I agree with you. There is, the teams are now colossal, multidiscipline teams are absolutely huge, and there's a consultant for every single discipline that you can possibly imagine. Traditionally, the architect used to take on a lot of that role, and it's developed into specialisms as you know, as time has evolved. There was a particularly big team on this project, but I still think, of course, there's a role for an architect because you have to control the design. Ultimately, the design is driven by the architect and the design quality, and people will try and value engineer it out and they will try and change it. But our brief from the chairman of the trust was that our brief was this was to be a world-class centre of excellence for healthcare, and he wanted to mimic Sloan Kettering, for example, in New York. As a client, they were very good because they were forcing us to do a good building. They weren't trying to penny pinch. Obviously, it's public money and it has to be seen as value for money and it has to deliver value for money. But they were keen that they understood the benefit of having good design and good architecture, and that was a big driver. Plus the location, we had to deal with Camden Council. It's smack in the middle of London. There was a lot of constraints on us in terms of planning permission and being located in a conservation area and all of that as well. So there is a role for the architect, certainly, to drive the design. In terms of managing the design team, we happen to be the lead design role also on that project. So it is a substantial, it is a substantial responsibility, and it's an enormous team. So we were then novated over to the contractor. It was a D&B procurement. So we designed it from 2009, from inception right through business case, all the way through to outline business case to planning permission. That all took about 4 or 5 years with the red tape and the approvals and the financial approvals and all the rest of it. And then we were novated to the contractor in 2015. So we've been working with the contractor now to deliver it. And it opens in hopefully August-ish this year. But yes, it's a massive team, absolutely enormous team.
That's really exciting now, August, that it's going to be.
It's very exciting, yeah. It'll be great to, I haven't been on the site for a couple of weeks, but one of my colleagues has been there and just taken some photographs, and it's looking almost finished now. It's like a finished building, which is wonderful to see, because like 3 years ago, it was a massive hole in the ground, 40 metres below Tottenham Court Road.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic.
So I suppose that kind of maybe brings us along to how COVID is affecting practice and the delivery of very important projects like the proton therapy beam unit. You were saying that you hadn't been to site for a couple of weeks. Is that because of the restrictions, or is that just because that's not your role at the moment? And maybe you just tell us a little bit how London is coping and the construction sector is coping.
It's a little bit of both, to be honest. We have limited our travel, particularly in London, because we're so dependent on public transport. And also there was restrictions on the site. Our site has remained operational because it's deemed an essential project. But they have had limited activity. They've had some limitations with supply chain deliveries, example, for materials and such like. My role, yes, very much my role is still to be involved in site, and normally I would be there, not every day, but I'd certainly be there regularly every week or so for meetings and things like that, and just general staying on top of it and staying involved in the project. It has changed the way we're working. Obviously, a lot of us are working from home. We have now started a phased return to the office, so some of our staff are back in the office. I'm personally still working from home, probably only for another week or so. I'm just waiting to see how the public transport pans out, and then we'll probably be heading back in there. And it's been reasonably successful. I think we can do everything from home. We were well geared up. We saw the lockdown coming in advance, so we were planning our IT systems and things probably about 2 or 3 weeks before we were officially told to go into lockdown, to make sure that everybody was capable of working from home. And most have. We've had probably small teams in London and small teams in Dublin on essential projects who've been in and out of the office, who were not dependent on public transport, and obviously all the safety in place. But it's been fairly successful working remotely, apart from things like design workshops where it's a little bit difficult to interact, on a virtual platform. But pretty much everything else nowadays, I think technology has moved on so much, it's quite successful.
Yeah. And do you think what we're currently experiencing is going to affect how you design hospitals in the future? Oh yeah, definitely. I think any major new hospital that's being designed now will have to be pandemic proof. There is guidance, the official guidance hasn't come out yet, but there will be official guidance probably within a couple of months
but it's going to change the way hospitals are laid out. They'll have separate pathways for COVID patients and non-COVID patients, and it'll become the norm. I think it'll have to become the norm because nobody knows if this will come back again or something similar will come back again. And I think it will be foolish not to incorporate the lessons that have been learned from this into new designs going forward.
Absolutely. And just going back to those multidisciplinary teams and all the different specialisms that were working with you on the UCLH project, how many women were there, Sheila? How many women?
Surprisingly, quite a few. The senior engineer is a woman. Myself, Scott Tallon Walker Director, is a woman. Quite a few of the design managers for the contractors are women. Quite a few actually. Still very male dominated, but it was good that we had quite a few women in senior roles, which is nice to see. And I'm very happy to say that our London office has got 70% women.
Oh, that's fantastic!
Which is a good statistic. Yeah,
great. And that's just through a natural hiring. That's not through any policy that you as a woman are
Excuse me. No. To be honest, I'm a firm believer in the best person for the job, whether you're man, woman, or animal. It doesn't really make much of a difference to me. But obviously, I'm very supportive of women, and I do think women make very successful architects. I think we're good managers. I think we're good multitaskers. I think we're good in a crisis. And yeah, I'm generally speaking, I think women make excellent architects, but as a company, we don't have a strict policy that you have to have a quota. I don't believe in quotas, but the right people for the job. But it's good that just so happens the right people are women.
Yeah, very good. And would you have any particular advice to women graduating from architecture now, in terms of career path or decisions, or or even advice that you would like to have got yourself when you were a young graduating architect?
Looking back with hindsight, I would probably, to be perfectly honest, when I came out of college, I thought I knew everything, but I didn't have a clue, really. There's an awful lot that has to be learned when you come out as a graduate. But I think if I was giving advice to my younger self, I would say not to be afraid to be assertive. I think I often, when I was younger, I mistook being assertive as coming across as being aggressive and being afraid to say what you wanted to do or how you felt or what you'd like or whatever. I think don't be afraid to do that. I have to say, Scott Tallon Walker were hugely supportive, and I never felt different. Because there weren't many women architects. I think there was only 2 when I joined the practice. But I never felt that I stood out or that I was different. I felt just as capable, and I was always treated as being as capable as everybody else. So I think it's just to have the confidence and not be afraid to make your opinion heard or voice your opinion, and just get on with it. Because I think nowadays, it's completely different now than when I graduated 30 years ago. There's much more awareness, and I think women are much more respected in the profession now than they were.
Yeah. And it's kind of self-perpetuating then. The more women that there are around, the more acceptable it becomes, and then the more role models that you have, and the more perhaps mentoring that if they feel they need it, they may feel they can approach a woman quicker than they can approach a male colleague. Perhaps, not always the case, but perhaps. And so what's next for you? Have you any immediate plans, or what's the next project?
Well, I'd love to do another proton centre, but there's a few coming up in Europe that we're looking at and putting bids in for those. It'd be great to do another one because we've learned so much on this, and it really is quite specialised. So obviously we'd love to do that. I like working in the healthcare sector or the science and labs in the complicated buildings. They're a challenge, and I like working on large scale projects. So at the moment I'm working on another master plan for another rebuild of a hospital down in the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, where effectively it's very old estate and they need to rebuild the entire hospital. It's a big campus, so we're working on that at the moment, and that'll go to a business case hopefully by the end of the year. It's one of the ones that have been promised funding for this big spend of healthcare infrastructure. And then I'm working on submissions for another couple of big hospitals here, and still working on smaller healthcare and science projects on frameworks in the UK. So a mix of some smaller scale stuff, and we're targeting a few larger scale projects that we hope to be successful on, at least one of them. Should be nice.
And I know Scott Tallon Walker do some healthcare work obviously in Ireland as well. And would your expertise be brought in to the Dublin office now, or do you work very much as?
No, we're very joined up. So we have obviously we've London, Dublin, and we've Cork and Galway offices as well. But we tend to work as a whole. So a lot of the information and the knowledge is shared across the same board of directors in London and in Ireland. And there's a lot of common ground and shared information and sharing of resources for certain things. So, we wouldn't necessarily have huge IT departments, for example, in London. So we share some of that resource with Dublin. But in terms of the healthcare, we have a big healthcare team in Ireland because we're doing a huge amount there as well. But our focus in London is nearly all healthcare. So it's not that we don't do other sectors, but we tend to specialise in a lot of health and science just by the way it's happened in the UK. So all of our team are well geared up. So we can share that resource across all of the offices, but the London staff tend to focus on the healthcare projects that we have here.
Yeah. Very, very good. And I mean, it's a good area of business to be in the current time.
It is now. Hopefully they're going to spend a lot of money if Boris is to be believed. Yeah.
So maybe then to just finish off, Sheila, and I know this is probably, I don't know how easy this question is to answer, but from what you've seen in your experience in the UK and working in hospital and healthcare sector, is there anything that you would like to do in Dublin if the new Minister for Health said, come here to me, Sheila, come back to Ireland, give me some advice. What do we need to do in terms of the kind of the physical infrastructure of our hospitals and the services we provide? Is there anything you feel that from your experience?
I think there's a lot of money being pumped into the Children's Hospital, the prime example. And there is a programme of work across for the HSE across hospitals in Ireland. I think a lot of money needs to go into refurbishing and repairing and rebuilding and backlog maintenance, and because some of the standards of some of the hospitals is really not up to current world standard in terms of healthcare. So I think there's a programme of fixing and refurbishing and expanding some of the existing facilities, but also embracing things like, for example, PBT or the Proton technology to build something like that and provide real state-of-the-art cancer care in Ireland would be fantastic. But obviously there's funding issues and it's not as easy as waving a magic wand to make it happen. But I think that the Irish health system is pretty good actually, but there is certainly room for improvement on some of the facilities, and it starts with the basics, getting the basics right and having decent accommodation for patients. It's a very traumatic experience for anybody going into hospital, regardless of how major or minor it is. And obviously the COVID pandemic is going to have an effect on the way hospitals are designed and getting things back to normal.
Yeah, indeed. Good. All right. Well done to you. And we say we're all very proud of you in Bolton Street. Or,
we're very proud of you, past president of the Institute.
Just in terms of what you've achieved, and as a director of Scott Tallon Walker, it's really fantastic. So well done. So we'll close our little conversation there, Sheila, if that's all right with you. And,
that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again for joining us.
Not at all.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.